But let's get perspective on the upcoming elections from Zimbabwean journalist Zenzele Ndebele. Zenzele, good evening to you. Thanks for your time tonight. Firstly, give us a sense of what things are like in Zimbabwe right now, particularly from a point of view of the protection of rights and freedoms going into next week's election.
Evening to you. Yeah, it's just about 4 or 5 days left before the elections. It's a bit quiet, excitement in some areas, but this election, I've always said, this election is not like any other elections that I've seen in Zimbabwe. There's less of enthusiasm. People are, it's like a delayed match of some sort. So, but we have seen a number of skirmishes here and there, especially when it comes to the tearing down and burning of billboards by the opposition. So some of the billboards that were put up by the opposition in areas like Mutare, Bulawayo, Gwanda were destroyed. We have seen also the opposition doing last-minute court applications to get issues like the number of polling stations that are going to be used, the number of ballot papers that have been printed. We've heard that police officers are forced to do postal voting in front of their bosses. So those are the issues that are happening now. But I guess people, the general public, is just waiting for Wednesday so that they make their choices.
Let's talk about what the campaigning period has been like. And earlier on this week, we had reports of people that had been arrested while part of a campaign that was held by some of the members of those that are in the opposition parties. Generally, Zenzele, from what you've been able to see, I mean, has there been free and fair campaigning in the country?
I would say it has not been free and fair, but it has been largely peaceful. I would say it has not been free and fair in the sense that at the beginning of campaign, around July and maybe part of August, we saw some of the rallies by Emmerson Chamisa being banned. We saw Chamisa's supporters being tear gassed by the police, and also the fact that actually one person died in Harare where there was violence. We've seen members of the opposition being arrested. Those are the issues that a lot of people would say it has not been free and fair. The playing field has not been level. But it has been largely been peaceful compared to other elections in Zimbabwe where there's always been violence. These elections are better in the sense that we have not had so many incidents of violence being reported, because if you compare this year and 2008, 2013, there was a lot of violence that was going on. But I would say this time around it has been largely peaceful, although there are serious issues that need to be addressed when it comes to the level playing field.
Let's talk about the role of election observers and also of journalists who are in Zimbabwe to cover this year's elections. Just this past week, in fact, just this past day, we had a team from Good Governance Africa, from South Africa, that was in Zimbabwe to, study the elections and to do research, that were kicked out of the country. They, of course, have not been the only ones.
Yeah, I would say there's been a lot of surveillance that has been going on election observers, on people who are visiting Zimbabwe, on journalists. I would say that because Chris was deported, I think, a day or so after he had arrived in Zimbabwe and they'd gone through the immigration. So that means someone somewhere was following them. We have seen stories. Today, the Herald did a story where they were saying, accusing European Union observers of bribing journalists with whiskey so that they write negative things about Zimbabwe. The other observers or journalists who have not been allowed or have not been given accreditation. A prominent lawyer in Zimbabwe here, Musa Kika, did not get his accreditation despite the fact that he had applied for it. So there seems to be a bit of control from the point of government. They want certain people out. They want to control certain narratives. And you find that although they are observers, they are really keeping a close eye on them. And some of the people who are not international observers, but who are coming in with an interest to cover elections as journalists, people like Chris, are at risk of being deported, not getting accreditation, and not being allowed to get into Zimbabwe.
Let's talk about the voters' roll and its status currently, especially going into the election next week. Is there confidence in the status of the voters' roll in the various regions of the country?
The issue of the voters' roll is going to be always problematic in the Zimbabwean election, and this is where I think the opposition needs to address this thing way before elections when there's still time. Because at the last minute, even though they get the copy of the voters' roll, they will not even know whether it is the voters' roll that is going to be used in the elections, and they won't have time to analyze it. Zimbabwe uses a polling station-based voters' roll. So that means one person appears only on their polling station. So if you are an MP or a councillor, let's start with a councillor, and in your ward there are 10 polling stations, so you're going to get 10 voters' rolls. And if you are an MP, there are maybe 400 or let's say 50 polling stations in your constituency, you're going to get that. That means for a president, you are going to get, if there are about 2,000 polling stations in Zimbabwe for this election, that means you're going to get 2,000 copies of the voters' roll, because the electoral law says our polling stations or our elections are ward-based, and the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission may produce a national voters' roll, and this will not be used for the purposes of the elections. So the issue of the voters' roll is problematic. There needs to be time for the candidates to be able to look at it to see that the people who are in those wards are actually on the voters' roll. There are no mistakes and all these kind of things. But with 5 minutes to the election, I don't see that happening. So there will always be an issue with the voters' roll until this issue is really addressed at a low level. There is need to amend the Electoral Act in Zimbabwe.
Zenzele, when you look at this election, is it a two-horse race?
Yes, it is a two-horse race. This election is between Emmerson Mnangagwa for ZANU-PF and Nelson Chamisa for Citizen Coalition for Change. These are the two guys. Of course, we have about 10 or 11 presidential elections. Others, I don't see them making the mark. These are the two guys who are going to be contesting for the presidency, who are going to be contesting for the parliamentary. Like I've said to other people, Chamisa wants to, consolidate his power. He just set up this party last year, so he needs to feel like he really has the grip of the party. Mnangagwa is seeking a second term. This is his last term according to the constitution, and he wants to win with a healthy lead, probably a 2/3 majority, so that he can manage his succession, and also, if possible, if he wants another term, have enough votes in parliament to amend the constitution so that he has another term.
All right, Zenzele Ndebele, we'll leave it there for tonight. He is a Zimbabwean journalist.